Hi, let's take a look at how we can create original settings for our stories in the same way pro authors like George R.R. Martin do. The base concept is simple but slightly counterintuitive, and it's that small size and limits bring originality and ideas, while excessive freedom leads to generalization and cliches. It's called principle of creative limitation. The idea is that the more constraints you have to work within, the easier it is to come up with original ideas and solutions. Anyway, for this to work, you need godlike knowledge of every relevant part of your world.
Are you a god?
Not yet. And if you are immortal too, there's a limit to what you can imagine with an adequate level of realism before things start to fall apart. Stretching your imagination too far, it's like trying to stretch an image too big. It gets all blurry. And when things gets blurry, we fall back on cliches and cool stuff already imagined but by other people. And we don't want that. So the question is, how can we keep our imagination crisp and sharp while increasing the size of the world? The secret is to be very intentional about what we show. If we choose the right elements and treat them with the right level of detail, we can tile those elements together along the story and create a large but still vivid universe. For example, let's take a Game of Thrones. No, the book. 9 of the first 12 chapters take place at Winterfell, and they are filled with all sorts of historical facts and the day-by-day life in the castle, including some weird details about how Brandon the Builder liked to build his bathrooms. Maybe it's silly, but this level of detail is critical for both the reader and the writer. For the reader, it's important because of the thing called the Iceberg Effect, which we'll cover later in the video, and that, like most villains in movies, sadly misunderstood. And for the writer, it's important because only that level of details can spark ideas and create something that feels unique and original, even when it's just a bathroom in a castle. You see, details are the things that light up your world. And since cliches like to hide in the shadows, you want to build in your head the mental equivalent of an open field at noon. Everything should be lit and thought through. Then you just take the details you're more excited about and include them in the story. By the way, when trying to fit things within the limits of your imagination, physical size isn't the only size you should worry about, if you know what I mean. And what I mean is historical depth. What did you think I meant? Why is that Winterfell is 8,000 years old and King's Landing is only 300? I mean, how convenient that the largest location in the story is also the most recent, isn't it? Well, yeah, it is convenient. And it's also pretty smart. Creative limitations. Remember? By cutting the time span, George has given himself the conditions to write a super detailed history that makes the capital very exciting and well-defined, despite being so much bigger than Winterfell. Okay, so now that we are all on the same boat with the perks and wonders of developing your world with some kind of constraints, we also got to talk about the relationship between story structure and the world where a story takes place. Because you can't have one without the other. Your world, aka the setting, defines the limits of your story. It's inevitable. When you introduce an event inside your world, the architecture and the laws you created limit the number of possible outcomes. As writer, your work is to pick the best outcome for the story and move to the next event. So the mechanics of your world are a fundamental part of the story development process, to the point where an original story cannot be taken out of its setting and put somewhere else without becoming something completely different. What would Harry Potter look like if Hogwarts wasn't a school for wizards but a mental asylum? We don't know. have been awesome. The point is that developing world building and story structure together creates a synergy that produces a more complex world and a more original story. Here's a method you can use to organize your ideas along those lines. It's called the 4 pillars of world building for story. And the 4 pillars are period, which is when the story takes place relative to the global timeline of your world. There is duration, which is how long the story stretches across time. There is location, which are the actual location of your world where the story takes place, like Winterfell, King's Landing, and so on. And then there is conflict, meaning the main levels of conflict characters will have to deal with through the course of the story. Using these 4 points as a reference, you can start small and grow your world and your story to any level of complexity you want. It's pretty cool. Let's see how it works in practice. Location and period. We've seen how details are great for the writer to keep things original and stay away from cliches. And I mentioned that it's important for the reader as well because of the iceberg effect. Here's how it works. In Game of Thrones, the North is as big as the other 6 kingdoms combined. So it's big.
That's what she said.
And there is no way in hell to show everything there is to show in the North without being super generic, and therefore risking cliches or just being boring. Entering the iceberg. You show just the tip, and we have the reader assume there's a whole lot more like that under the surface. Meaning that once we know how things work at Winterfell with such detail and clarity, it becomes easy to imagine how things might work in the rest of the land ruled by our wolfy friends, the Starks. Place full of history, legends, bravery, honor, and no practical sense whatsoever. That's pretty much how it works. But why did I say the iceberg effect is often misunderstood? Because it's commonly presented as a way to fake word complexity. But we're faking nothing. We're just choosing wisely what locations to show to develop the story so that we can make those locations as complex and compelling as possible and use them as a proxy to deliver the rest of the world around. There's nothing fake about being strategic in what we choose to show. It's just good writing. Let's go to duration and conflict. Pop quiz. Why does the Song of Ice and Fire have seasons that last for years? Because natural elements are one of the levels of conflict. A story can have many different levels of conflict. We have inner conflict of a character battling his own inner demons. We have personal conflict when the conflict is with someone else. We have conflict against society and political forces. We have conflict against the environment, and even above that in some cases. Obviously, the main plot of A Song of Ice and Fire is developed around the political conflict, but the winter and the long night are looming above everything right from the start. But since the story stretches across multiple years, how anticlimactic would that have been to have multiple winters going by year after year, waiting for the final one? Terrible. Solution? The season lasts for years. We get one summer, one autumn, and one winter. Duration and conflict, baby. And speaking of duration, if you're still here, it might be a good moment to like and subscribe because I'm about to wrap things up. Here are the takeaways from this video. Number 1, creative limitation. Don't be broad and generic. Stay small and specific. Make things as cool as you can and let the iceberg effect do the rest. Number 2, world building goes hand in hand with story development. So as you build your world, keep your eyes on period when the story takes place, duration of the story, the specific locations of the world where the story will be developed, and the different levels of conflict of the story and how they play out with the elements of your world. Put everything together, and the secret for original world building ain't a secret anymore. If you enjoyed this video, I got another one about character somewhere around here, so you can check that out too. And I'll see you next time, folks. Cheers.